before we dive in. I just want to briefly talk about the handout that I gave last week. So the single sheet handout had kind of three main points to it. What is a parable? What a parable is not. And then on the back page, how should we interpret parables? And then it listed, in a sense, every parable that Jesus talks about. Again, we're only going to talk about half of these parables on the back over the next 4 weeks. We'll come back to the other half maybe next year. Right? So what a parable is not. I think that's more important than what a parable is. We can, if you want, press a parable to tell us everything. You could try and say that every single person in a parable represents some person in real life. You could say that when we come across a parable about a wedding, that it has to perfectly represent what a wedding in the first century would have looked like. Some parables may talk about salvation or forgiveness, and we might look at the parable and say, well, this is giving us a complete picture as to how to understand what forgiveness is or what salvation is. We can do that if you like, but I don't necessarily think every parable is supposed to give us all the answers, right? We can think about a parable kind of like a window. We can look out the window and we can see some distant landscape, but it doesn't necessarily tell us the whole picture of what the world around us looks like. So at times it'll seem like a parable is talking about salvation, or maybe we'll try and relate certain people into the parables to like God or Jesus or us, but they might not be talking about those particular things. In fact, I would argue parables typically are after one particular point, and they're just uninterested in all the other points. Because again, parables are fictional stories that Jesus is telling, right? They use real-world elements, but it doesn't mean that those real-world elements have to correspond to things in our reality. You okay with that? Mm-hmm. Right? So we'll try and we'll press these parables hard sometimes, but sometimes that leads to kind of dizzying paradoxes if you try and force them to give you answers, which we do sometimes, right? I know I try and force them to give answers sometimes, and sometimes they start to make less sense the more you try and squeeze them.
So they're very contextual. The moment,
I like your explanation on the bottom of
At the
this
bottom?
single page, the show mercy one,
Oh, about the parable of the Good Samaritan.
the Good Samaritan.
In a sense, I think you could argue the whole point of that is Jesus is telling people to show mercy, to have compassion. But again, if he just says that doesn't really capture your attention. You might think, well, great words, Jesus. I'm going to go back home and do something else. So he tells a parable that's a little bit shocking, right? The people you would think would show mercy, right? The Jewish priest, a Levite, they don't do it. But the enemies to the north, the Samaritan, he's the one that shows mercy. So everyone listening probably knows it's a good idea to show mercy. But I think it might jar them from complacency to hear kind of this shocking tale about a Samaritan showing mercy. So I think in part that is what the parables are meant to do. They're supposed to have these simple points in a sense, show mercy. But Jesus will tell often kind of these more shocking stories to kind of get us to think a little bit and to maybe kind of give us a swift kick in the pants, if you will, to actually do that simple thing, show mercy, that he's asking us to do.
There are just a couple of parables that actually explains what they mean.
There's only 3, I think, that he actually offers an explanation. And even when he does, it doesn't necessarily help us. It's not like we can sit back and say, well, now I know exactly what he's talking about. There still could be questions left unresolved.
But isn't it the same thing when pastors use stories about family and friends and introduces in to get people to think and relate it to their own life rather than to...
Stories.
You're making 2 points, or more points.
Absolutely. I mean, if you listen to the first story I usually tell in a sermon, usually I'm finishing that story with one particular word or phrase that's just getting me into the text. So the story itself is utterly, you could look at the story and think, well, how does this relate to the text? Well, it doesn't. It's not supposed to. It's only supposed to get us to that one thread that then gets us into the text. And you can think about parables that same way. Oftentimes they only have one single thread, and the whole parable is just window dressing. It doesn't actually really matter. It's only getting us to this one single point. Now, you could make the parable say a whole bunch of stuff if you wanted to. I'm not saying you can't. It might get complicated, though, if we start to really force them to speak loudly. But we'll see how we take them. I think with each passing week, these will get more and more difficult. So I think we're starting, hopefully, easy today. Sound good? And I didn't bring this study's based on a particular book that's sitting in my office, I think. And the author broke up the category, or the parables of Jesus, into 8 different categories. We'll look at 4 of the 8 over these next 4 weeks. So this first category of parable is called the present kingdom. What do we mean by that? It means that these parables are talking about how God's kingdom, we're on to the handout for today now, how God's kingdom, how God's presence, how God's activity, all the above are slowly breaking into the world, like right here and right now. On week 4 of this study, at the end of the month, we'll talk, the parables will be about God's future kingdom, right? Like the second coming of Jesus, Judgment Day. So we know that there's a future kingdom of God that's going to arrive and fully eradicate sin and death. But Jesus clearly also talks about how that kingdom is also showing up slowly, like right here and right now. So I think what we'll see for a thread for these parables is patience, which is hard, right? Because sometimes we look out in the world and think, it doesn't look like God's kingdom is slowly showing up, right? It looks like there's still a lot of bad stuff happening in the world. So many of these parables about how God's kingdom is slowly showing up are in a sense a call for patience, right? We probably want God's kingdom to show up like a waterfall, but sometimes it's more just kind of like a trickle. And so Jesus says, you just gotta wait, right? That second coming is going to happen, but in the meantime, you just gotta be a little bit patient and on the lookout. We're going to read these, and if you have a Bible in front of you, we're actually going to open them up. I know. What a concept in a Bible study. I have each of them printed on the handout too. So we're in Mark chapter 4 here for the growing seed. Really, the reason we do this is kind of for your own sake here. Sometimes it's helpful to look at the narratives before and after these parables to see how they fit in, if you're talking about kind of the context that these parables are showing up. Sometimes it is helpful to see, well, what was Jesus saying right before he said this parable? And what happens right after Jesus said this parable? Sometimes it's unrelated, but sometimes the lead in and the lead out are helpful for understanding and interpreting these parables. So on this handout, under section 1, the growing seed, does someone want to read that little paragraph there from Mark chapter 4, verses 26 through 29 to get us started?
Right from the handout?
Sure.
Okay. He also said, "The kingdom of God is as if someone would scatter seed on the ground and would sleep and rise night and day, and the seed would sprout and grow. He does not know how. The earth produces of itself first the stalk, then the head, then the full grain in the head. But when the grain is ripe, at once he goes in with his sickle, because the harvest has come."
Excellent. Thank you, Ann. So without cheating and looking at the initial thoughts I have on the page here, what are your initial thoughts as you hear this parable read? They don't have to be earth-shattering
Well,
thoughts.
sort of
but-
like it's going to happen, if the intent is for it to happen, whether or not you want it to or don't want it to, or whatever, or understand it, yeah.
Gotcha. Do you take that from, because in line, verse 28, the earth produces of itself in a sense? Like it's, or even where it says the sower does not know kind of how it's happening?
I myself take it from 27 in the handout where it says, "And would sleep and rise night and day, and the seed would sprout and grow. He does not know how."
So it's going to happen whether you, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And it's the same process every time. With
Uh,
seeds.
Cycle of
Like,
life.
Mhm.
it's the same thing.
Yep. In a sense, no matter who the sower is, right? I like that. Anyone else with any insights on this parable?
Maybe,
I think that's-
maybe the head is maybe the ending result of it, and again with the patience that you're looking for, we have to wait for that.
You gotta wait for the seed to actually grow. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then God comes in and takes the harvest?
And then God comes in and, yep,
I don't know.
goes in with his sickle. Yeah, because the harvest has, the harvest has come. Mm-hmm. Those are some pretty good thoughts right there. So how we'll do each of these parables as you look at the handout. So I'll have some initial thoughts, which are pretty bare bones. I'll give interpretive options, which in a sense are directly from the book I used. Those are, in a sense, if you want direct answers as to what does this parable mean, you'll hopefully find them under interpretive options. Theological angles are more in a sense of if I were to go preach this text, how would I preach it? What threads would I pull at? Which are sometimes different than interpretive options. And then we'll wrap up each parable with questions to consider. So we'll toss some questions at these parables and see if we can get any answers from them. Sound good? So some initial thoughts, interpretive options, theological angles, questions to consider. So let's take a look. Initial thoughts. This parable is only found in the Gospel of Mark. That'll happen sometimes with these parables, and we can kind of ask, is that relevant? Why does Mark only tell this? Why did Matthew and Luke and John leave it out? Yes, in chapter 4, there are other parables that surround this one. So is there a relationship to the other parables in chapter 4? And then with each of these, I suppose because I'm a little bit of a church nerd like this, I'll tell you when they show up next. So you got to wait till June of 27 to hear this on a Sunday morning, at least here at
Only a
East
little over a
Union.
year
So a little over a year. Mark your calendars. Yeah. So interpretive options on this one. You could say that the sower is Jesus, the seed is faith growing within us, the harvest is judgment day. Right? That's a pretty straightforward interpretation of this. I like point 3, God's kingdom is miraculous, and this kind of goes back to your initial point. It doesn't necessarily need our help, right? The seed kind of just grows on its own because that's what seeds do. And it even says the sower is just waking and sleeping and doesn't really know how the seed is growing, which I think is good news for us, right? We can't necessarily mess it up, that God's kingdom's going to show up, sometimes even in spite of our ignorance or our mistakes.
There's a song in the musical Godspell that's exactly this, and it's called All Good Gifts. We plow the seed and scatter the good seed on the plow and scatter the good seed on the land, but it is fed and watered by God's almighty hand. And then it goes on to say all good things come from heaven above, and now we'll thank the Lord for all his love.
I like it. Mm-hmm.
My footnote says in here, the word of God, when sown in men's hearts, produces fruit sometimes slowly, but always surely.
Yeah, there's no stopping it.
You know,
I like that.
I think one thing that occurs to me is this is a description of one of the greatest advances in mankind, and that's agriculture,
Yeah.
which happened about 10, 12,000 years ago. And maybe it was good, maybe it was bad for the earth, because look at, now we're up to 7, 8 billion people, and we're dominating and destroying the earth. But that simply planting the seed and growing and harvesting, that process changed the direction of mankind. And it occurred in the Middle East, it occurred in China, it occurred in India, it occurred in the Americas, all about the same time after the last ice age. And
I could preach that. If agriculture changed the course of human history, then God's kingdom being planted also changes the course of history. Yeah. I like that. Here's, so some theological angles. This is always the fun part of writing a sermon at the bottom of one, into the top of two. There's a lot of different angles you could take on this. So for instance, at the top of page 2, the second bullet point, is this parable a warning about future judgments? To bear good fruit now before that sickle arrives at the end? I don't necessarily, the parable is about Judgment Day. I think it's about what God's kingdom is up to. But this is kind of an example of how you could just, in a sense, cherry pick and really zoom in on that sickle imagery and that harvest imagery and kind of wonder, well, maybe we're the plant that's growing and we really got to, step up our game and start bearing some fruit before that sickle arrives and cuts us down. Again, I don't think that's necessarily what the parable is about, but you can see how if you just zoom in closely, you can make parables sometimes say things that maybe they're not necessarily trying to say. Okay, let's throw some questions at this particular parable. Question 2 and 3 to me are the most interesting. I think we can ask about the man that shows up in this parable, right? In a sense, the sower, as he described. Someone who would scatter seed. He doesn't know how the seed is growing, right? So if we think of this as a farmer who is like planting crops, farmers know very well like what they're doing out in their fields, right? They could probably tell you how every inch and corner of their field produces, how much fertilizer to put on one spot, what the soil conditions are like for another spot, right? There's nothing that happens in their fields that they don't know about. And yet we get this, we'll call him a farmer in this parable. He just tosses seed out there and we're told, well, he goes to sleep, wakes up, goes to sleep, wakes up, and oh my gosh, the seed is growing. How is that happening? He doesn't know how it's actually growing. He seems a little ignorant of the growing process. So we could ask the question of, well, is that significant? Like, why does this farmer seem to not be a very good farmer? But again, I don't think the parable is trying to give us a commentary on like the farmer in this story. I think it's trying to talk about the seed, right?
Yeah.
And the seed is growing by itself. And what does that say about God's kingdom? So again, it's a fun question to ask. Why does it seem like this farmer is a bad farmer? But I don't think that's what the parable is after. Some parables will seem like they have quite immoral elements in them. But again, I think that's just part of the story that they're trying to tell, right? They're trying to get us to a particular point. And the point for this parable, there needs to be a farmer that doesn't really know what he's doing to show that, hey, when the seed is planted, even if you don't know what you're doing, that seed is just going to grow on its own. Which is question 3. So the earth, I don't think it says it in this translation. It says the earth produces automatically. Is the best translation of it. What does ours say? The earth produces of itself. The Greek in verse 28 is probably better, like automatically. Is that important that the earth is just automatically producing? It might be. I tend to think of like the seed itself is what is, like the seed is what's growing. So it's interesting to think of the earth kind of helping that process. So to go back to questions of environment, you could argue this parable is saying the earth doesn't need our help, right? That the earth is just going to grow things with or without us.
Like, just something that just keeps bothering me, that's in a perfect world, though. Farmers have worlds that aren't perfect, whether it's too much rain or not enough rain.
Mm-hmm.
Or weeds. Yeah, there's lots, this is like a perfect little world where the rain is doing this perfectly.
Just growing automatically.
The
Uh-huh.
lizard can die
Yeah, and this is a good reminder, right? So it's using real-world elements, but you got to remember the story itself is,
It's just about perfect.
yeah. So the story itself is fiction, right? It's not. It's not like Jesus is saying, "Well, 27 years ago, I knew this sower," right? And this is exactly what he was doing. No, this is in a sense just a fictional, made-up story, because that's what parables are. Which might be strange to say about things that show up in the Bible, but that's why parables are slightly different and kind of fun, in my opinion. So it's using real-world elements, right? Like this is a perfect situation. But I think it's trying to get us to the point that the kingdom of God, once here, is going to be unstoppable, right? Whether we know what we're doing or not, which for me is really good news, because much of the time I feel like this farmer that doesn't know what he's doing, right? I planted all this seed and it's growing. How is that happening? I mean, it's familiar when I'll give a sermon and think, man, that was just not a very good sermon. And then maybe one or two people will say, wow, that's what I needed to hear today. And I think, well, that's good because I didn't think it was worth saying. Right? So maybe this farmer is like, well, I've got no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just going to trust that God's going to make it happen anyway.
It's almost childlike. I mean, yesterday Ally and I planted seeds and she checked on them to see if they were up yet, you know, like.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And the onions were sticking above and it's, they're growing. And it's like she was so excited about all this, but it's,
Mm-hmm.
you don't, she doesn't understand that it's gonna take time and you gotta be patient.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I like it. Any final thoughts on this particular parable?
Well, I would question, I mean, in regard to that Jesus is the sower, I mean, there seems to be a little, kind of, if Jesus is the sower, and then we say he doesn't know how it happens, that's just a little bit odd to say. But if it's a man or a human, then it makes more sense to me that they don't know how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's if you're trying to push every single element. Right, you could say that Jesus is the sower, and then you could just ignore the part where he doesn't know. But this will be parables, and this is the fun.
Right.
This is the fun part of parables.
Right.
Is you don't have to make every single element correspond perfectly.
Right, but to me, it just makes more sense. We as humans sow the seed, we don't know how it works or whatever,
Yeah.
and we just move on our way.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, on one of your comments where it says you don't need, or God doesn't need.
Doesn't
human
need our help.
In the way I look at that, yeah, he is using humans in that manner. By sowing the seed.
True.
I mean, just one way to.
Yeah.
For
But
me,
they don't,
okay.
maybe they sow the seed, but they don't need to understand the whole process. Yeah.
Okay. Let's head off to the bottom of page 2, the wheat and the weeds. This is a longer one, so now we're in Matthew. You want to open up there, Matthew 13. So this is two kind of lengthy paragraphs here. So if someone wants to take maybe the first paragraph that just goes over to the top of 3, and then if someone wants to take the second paragraph for the wheat and the weeds. I don't think there's any big
I
words.
can read the first part. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field, but while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, the enemy has done this. The slave said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, no, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let them both of them grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.
Excellent. So, yeah. Someone want to handle the second paragraph there?
I can do it.
Thank you, Kathy.
Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where they will be," oh, my favorite line, "where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen."
Thank you. Yes. Any initial thoughts on?
Well, Jesus just explained it, so.
Well, Jesus just explained it, so we don't even need to talk
got the
about
answer.
it.
Except for what does gnashing of teeth actually look like? Thank you.
did that.
Did you read Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak?
Yeah, yeah.
There's gnashing of teeth in that.
Oh,
one.
yes.
That's why
Okay,
this
I-
is my
I
favorite
forgot.
one.
Yes.
Can you
My
dash
favorite.
again while I
Oh,
get the camera?
yeah.
I view it as you're in so much pain that you're like clenching
Okay.
like your teeth. So Jesus explained this one, so we don't even need to think about it? Well, that's fine.
You did a great job.
He did a great job explaining it. Thank you, Jesus. He did the work for us on this one.
Maybe they were supposed to ask the other parable.
They forgot to
I
ask.
know, where were the answers to the other
Yes,
one?
this
He
time.
references so difficult parables,
Yeah.
but he explained it. Why is it such a difficult parable?
That's at least what a scholar that was looking at this, I think they're all difficult to understand. I think it's because the explanation the explanation seems to focus more on judgment, whereas the initial, like the parable itself seems like we get the end of the parable at the bottom of 2, where it begins to talk about judgment. But much of the parable just talks about how the wheat and the weeds are living together,
Together.
right? And how an enemy planted the weeds, how you're not supposed to pull them up till the end. So it seems like the focus of the parable is just about good and evil coexisting, like right now, and will one day be taken care of. But then the explanation really talks about, angels with the reapers and the weeping and the gnashing. It seems really focused on kind of the solution to the parable. So yeah, Jesus gives us an explanation, but it seems to focus more on how is, in a sense, the problem of the parable, that there are wheat and weeds growing side by side, going
Yeah,
to be
and the problem is, how do you
rectified.
live with that? How do you live amongst all that evil if you're trying to be good, and
Mhm.
come to terms with that and survive it? And
Yeah. Which the explanation doesn't necessarily help with that.
No.
It helps with knowing that, well, one day
Right.
it'll be taken care of,
Yeah.
which is why I said the thread for these parables is patience, because that one day is not here yet. So the explanation is wonderful, but I don't know if it necessarily helps explain per se the parable.
You've given a sermon on this text. I don't know if it
Yeah.
was here or not, and I thought that was very helpful in further explaining. Maybe you'll get to that today. I mean, you gave
Yeah.
in your sermon, you gave a really good understanding of what.
Oh, appreciate that. So it's, well, since we don't have any initial thoughts, we'll go quickly with this one, because Jesus told us what it means. This parable is also only found in Matthew. Yes, Kathy, to your point of weeping and gnashing of teeth, if you hear that, you're in Matthew's gospel. Eventually, we'll get to parables that both Matthew and Luke have similar tellings of. And Matthew will have the weeping and the gnashing of the teeth, and Luke will read that and say, I'm going to leave that part out. So you know you're in Matthew, because he loves that imagery. This will show up in the middle of July, so you don't have to wait too long before we hear this one. What
There's
can we?
also the tearing of clothes and the beating of their chest or whatever. That's similar.
Even more to look forward to.
Yeah. So what can we do for interpretive options, at least according to the book? It could justify a laissez-faire attitude with the world's sins. You could look at this parable and say, well, Jesus said evil's here and there's nothing we can do about it. wouldn't recommend going that route. But I suppose you could. Point two, the church body contains both, so, not even just thinking about the world, but like the church itself contains both saint and sinner, contains both good and bad. Let's see, yeah, so a warning against trying to create a pure or dissent-free church, right? We're always going to have disagreements amongst us. That's just the way of it. Oh yeah, it could be about a battle of good and evil within a person. I think it's an interesting take on this parable. Maybe there's wheat and weeds like within us. It's a pretty Lutheran viewpoint to say that we're both saint and a sinner, and you're not going to get rid of the sinner part, in a sense, all on your own, or even perhaps within this life. Theological angles. Yeah, so I've preached on this one before. Point 3 was the direction I've taken this sermon before, which I guess, the only time my wife's made a truly positive comment about a sermon of mine. Normally she's pretty neutral. I've heard this guy talk before. I used point 3, which is God isn't the only actor on the stage of life, that the devil and evil are present too. So we might look at our lives and think, well, why are bad things happening to me? Sometimes we might even blame God and say, well, why is God maybe doing this or allowing this? And it's because God's not the only person on the stage of life with us, right? Like the devil and evil are also on the stage of life with us. So we can't always look at our life and say, well, why is God doing all these things? Well, it's not just God out there. There's also evil out there. So that's how I've taken the direction of this before.
Will you have to take a different direction now that you told us that when you preach on it?
I might have to.
So are you saying the devil is as powerful as God and he can't stop what God can't stop what the devil is doing? That goes deep, but
Well, yeah, we'll get to the book of Job soon.
He has to get permit, the devil has to get permission.
In that particular story, God gives the devil permission to.
That's the part when I do blame God, like, don't let this happen.
So is it saying that God's not powerful enough to stop evil from happening?
Yeah, can't we just get rid of the devil? That's what I still think we should be praying for, is get rid of this devil guy and all his.
Well, and I mean, so the good news of these parables, and I suppose the gospel, is that one day that will happen, right? And so the call for these parables is patience, which is hard.
In this parable, like, the wicked don't change either. We grow together. Like, at least part of it, I wish that some of them would switch over.
turn into wheat, yeah.
I mean, you could ask, why doesn't God just solve everything with the snap of his fingers? I mean,
Yeah.
if we knew that answer, then I suppose we'd be.
It wouldn't be so much fun.
And I guess well, I don't know if fun is the right word to use. Yeah.
But he tests us, and he gives us that will, to choose the right or the wrong. And so.
Yeah, I mean,
Which helps you to grow.
Right,
Yeah.
makes you stronger.
We did this Bible study once a long time ago in another church, and the source that we were using was Letters from a Skeptic. And so it started, there was a young man who had kind of a Christian rebirth in college, but his dad was still very much a skeptic. So the whole book is, they're real letters, they're writing back and forth. And at one point, here comes the big question, why do bad things happen to good people? So what I remember is...
I've got an answer to that question.
Yeah. Well, what the answer was here was like, okay, imagine that there's a battle is about to happen, and there's a general who can foresee the whole thing. Right on the line of where the battle's going to happen lives his daughter or something like that. Now, he knows he's got to send the army in to defeat, the other side. But he also knows that in doing that, his daughter and her family, whatever, most likely gonna get killed. So it's kind of like the overall, what's overall going to be best for everything, kind of,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Heidi, your question, and that's the question of suffering. So why does a good God allow evil or suffering to exist? Right? And that's a philosophical question that folks have been wrestling with forever. And there's different answers and different ways you can go about it, so we won't be able to solve it here. But it is a hard question, right? My question is of why do bad things happen to good people is blunt and crass. It's that there are no good people. Right? I mean, theologically speaking, there are no, Jesus says it. Why do you call, the rich man calls Jesus good, and Jesus says, why do you call me good? Only God is good. I think that also, that thought also makes it seem like if we do good things, then good things will happen to us. Or if we do bad things, then bad things will happen to us. So it feels more like karma, which is also not necessarily a Christian viewpoint either, right? So that's my thought on that.
Yeah, we're followers.
What?
Or you could take, like, if you're gonna take a real word take on it, maybe it would be like, why is all this cancer about? Why, so much cancer? Well, I'm going out on a limb here, maybe eventually so much cancer is going to cause somebody to figure out the answer to it. If it just comes, kind of here and there sporadically, we're gonna forget about it because there's so much else going on that we just forget about it. But if it's happening constantly, then it brings it to the fore, and maybe something good could actually happen of that.
I think the question of suffering, because such tragic things do happen to folks, some more than others, I think you almost need to find the quote-unquote answer that satisfies or almost brings the most comfort to you.
Yeah.
Because there is no real good
Answer.
answer. Okay. See, this parable gave us something to talk about. The wheat and the weeds are growing together, and that's just going to be how it is until the end of time, or the second coming, or Judgment Day, however you want to think about that.
I think God tests us to make us stronger. All the bad things and everything that happens, there has got to be a purpose for this. And like you said, maybe a cure for cancer will come out of it because it's so wide. But I think God uses this to make people stronger, to make their belief solid.
We can still be angry at God, though, about it, right?
Sure.
I think
We
we're
can still
poisoning the earth. That's where it comes from.
we can still question God's methodology if that's what it is, right? You could say, well, did we really need to have X amount of kids die from cancer just so one day the answer could be found? Right? You're okay to sit there and kind of like Job, shake your fist at the heavens and say, if that's the answer, God, I still don't like it, because that's what Job does, right? It's not that he's kind of guessing as to what God's methodology is. God's telling him, here's how it is, Job, and Job says, I still don't like it. Right?
Yeah.
So
It is.
we'll get to Job within, I think, the next 6 months or so, because that's,
Yeah, but didn't we start this wheel rolling ourselves by first sin? I mean, we created it. We had, we had the choice, and there was the tree, and we
chose
ate
not to
from
go
it, so.
with God.
But
yeah.
God is always there to support us and
Mhm.
be strong for us, and
Yeah.
it's just the way it is.
Yeah, so we gave space for the wheat to show up, and now we're complaining about the wheat being there, or not the wheat, the weeds.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe we opened the door
Yeah.
for the weeds to show up, and now we're looking at them saying, "Hey, we don't like these weeds," and God's like, "Well, what?
Natural consequences.
I,
Still there
I
for you."
just planted wheat to start, and look what you
You
did."
made your choice.
For the suburbanites, among us. It's the parable of the long proud suburban homeowner.
Yeah, trying to get rid of all those
All
weeds.
dandelions.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Can't be done.
Where are you going after Bible
Fleet farm.
It's futile.
To get the dandelion killer. No, you gotta let them grow according to the parable.
That's right.
I remember hearing a sermon once where we were warned not, I mean, because we place ourselves in these parables, and in this particular parable, it's very, almost everyone puts them, say, well, we're wheat,
Yeah.
and we're judging other, so it's kind of, don't be judgmental, because, you know, we're judging other people, they must be the weed.
Yeah.
Kind of goes back to what you just said, no one is good. We very well.
We don't like to think about it that way,
Well,
but
no, but I mean,
I hate to ruin your days.
but I'd rather think of myself as a weed, and God is gonna save me somehow. Maybe that's
Not according to this parable.
Weeds first, second, no. Don't wanna be a weed.
I mean, I'm just reading it.
Yeah, that's not a goal.
And this is where we have to be careful too, because it seems like the wheat and the weeds can they change?
That's what I
Does
would
the
say.
parable allow for a weed to become a wheat? And does the parable allow for a wheat to turn into a weed? It doesn't seem like it, because that's not how wheat and weeds function. But again, if we're demanding this parable give us a picture of salvation, we're gonna be standing on pretty shaky
Now, if
ground.
Steph would be here, she'd pull out her King James, and the King James is not
It's
the
a
word is
tear.
not weed, it's a tear.
A
So-
tear.
So is there
It's a tear. So in
tear
first
is different?
in first century Palestine, I think you can make the argument that when Jesus is saying like wheat and tares, whatever that word in the Greek is, that those two things look nearly identical, and you can't necessarily just from first glance tell the difference between a wheat
That changes the whole meaning.
and a weed, right?
The tear, not, maybe not be able to change.
Therefore, the tares are gathered and burned in the fire.
Is it
Yeah, so I think that's,
Yes.
yeah,
But Jesus does say that the good seed are the children of the kingdom, and the weeds are the children of the evil one.
yeah.
So he does separate out the two. I mean, there's
You will,
one,
yeah.
there's
Oh,
the
we're gonna
other.
talk about plenty of judgment these next 4 weeks.
He was pretty black and white on that one.
Strap in.
Yeah,
Well, sometimes there are good parts to weeds. Like when the dandelions go to seed, the goldfinches love it. They eat them all up.
And you can make wine out of them.
Isn't that, there's that.
well, and this, so it also could be a question of what we, oh, the goats eat up the weeds or the dandelions?
No, goldfinches.
Oh.
Finches.
They
Well,
love
and-
the
I've heard
seeds.
of goldfinch.
Well, and two, like, so we call a dandelion a weed, but that's just what we've labeled it,
It's in the eye
right?
of the beholder.
So it's,
Yep,
you
it
could,
is.
so you could ask the question too, what we label maybe, whether it's sin or someone's a sinner or someone is good or bad, that could just be us imposing our particular morals or values on the world. And maybe God looks at things differently too. Which is good and bad news, because maybe we think of ourselves as a wheat and God looks at us and says, well, you
Sorry.
got a couple.
Kind of a dandelion.
Okay, I'm gonna say it.
Let's do it.
There's a lot of people smoking weed that seem pretty happy to me.
I'll let you preach that sermon.
Now that it's legal.
Yes. Okay, so you guys said there was nothing to talk about with that one, but we sure talked a lot about that one. Let's go to number 3, the yeast. Who wants, this one shows up in Matthew and in Luke. Who wants to take Matthew 13? So we're on point number 3 here, the yeast. Who wants to read Matthew's version of this, and who wants to read Luke's version of it?
I'll do the first one. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened.
Perfect, that's it. And then who wants to read the Luke's version? There's there's no big words.
And Jesus said.
There we go, Tammy.
To what should I compare the kingdom of God? Is it like yeast that as a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened?
Perfect. What do we think of this one?
I don't understand it.
I don't understand, okay, yeah.
To be
What
raised,
does leavened mean?
to raise up, to rise.
Yeah, kind of like a leavening agent.
Unleavened bread, right?
Yeah.
Unleavened bread is out.
Yeah, so this would be, yeah, like a yeast or a leaven, yeah.
So yeast is leaven.
Yeast makes, something needs to be added.
Oh, something needs to be added.
The yeast needs to be added.
Yeast needs to be added. So we could ask then, what is the yeast? Right? Is it the gospel message? Is it Jesus? Is it the kingdom? Is it our presence out in the world, bringing about the kingdom?
It rises.
Yeah. Okay.
I have Revised Standard, and it's slightly different.
Yeah.
It's almost a different, I mean, if we're going down into the weeds on
Sure.
this, not to go back to
The
the.
tears? We're headed down to the tears?
He told them another parable, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven,
Yeah.
which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till all was leavened.
Oh.
And Ryan says,
The verb is different. It's-
Yeah.
yeah, this one says, he told them so another parable, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into a large amount of flour until it worked all through the dough.
Mm-hmm. I like it. Okay, I'll slowly find out what the Greek is here if my internet will work for me. Okay, that hid versus mixed is certainly a different feel.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeast is positive here. Sometimes they talk about yeast not being.
Is evil or unclean, yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeast does have positive and negative connotations within the New Testament. Here, it certainly feels like it's a positive thing.
That goes in with the next parable that we'll talk about. It talks about hidden too, so that kind of goes ties to that.
Okay.
It really changes the whole form.
It changes it, but we could also wonder, is that the point, right? You could wonder, is that one word even the point of the parable? Which I'm not quite sure it really is. So this is a short parable. I think that's good and bad news. I think it's bad news because there's just nothing to work with. It's hard to find a section of the parable we like and say, well, I'm just gonna hold on to this section because there's just nothing to even hold on to. This is what you get, so you almost have to just deal with the parable. It'll show up at the end of July, so we'll get to hear that one soon.
My footnote says kind of the negative. It says, since leaven is everywhere else in the Bible regarded as typifying presence of impurity or evil, some understand it here to indicate the presence of evil within Christendom.
Oh.
Which is fascinating.
I know, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, it says the kingdom of heaven will be in.
I would say that's an odd interpretation of this parable.
I'll cross it off.
Your Bible, you can do it for us.
No, don't take, that was just my note. So interpretive options,
I thought it was a little weird.
which is okay. I don't mind off-the-wall interpretations. I do think the interpretive options are pretty straightforward for this one, though. God takes what is small and makes it large. This is kind of like the mustard seed one. Let's see, God's kingdom will spread on its own. So we're back to the sower from Mark's gospel, our first parable. A woman shows up in this parable, which is pretty unusual. So you could argue that women are just as necessary for the gospel proclamation as men. Would be kind of a different way to interpret this particular parable. Let's see, and there's really only 3 things you can focus on, or 2 things you can focus on: the yeast, and then how much of the flour is leavened. So again, very little of the yeast is needed to transform the flour. And then you can ask the question of, it says that all the flour is leavened. So at the top of page 5, you can ask the question, should we make anything out of that? That the yeast transforms and leavens all of the flour. So is Jesus kind of getting after, well, once the gospel message is out there, it's just going to transform like all people or the entire world? So are we getting after like a universalist picture of salvation here? Again, I don't know if we should press the parable to say that. I think it would fall more in line with, like when we get to the book of Acts, it'll say, not to talk about predestination, but all the people that, in a sense, were like destined for salvation turned and believed the gospel. So in a sense, you could argue once all the people who are going to say yes to the gospel hear the gospel and are turned to the gospel, that is what perhaps all the flour being leavened here.
What kind
Could
of
be.
bread, leavened or unleavened, was most common for the average person, the average Jewish person in that time?
Probably unleavened, maybe? I don't know.
Okay, because I think that makes a difference in how you look at it, too.
Yeah.
And basically, the yeast is eating the flour. It is its food. So, and it's the byproducts, the gases, it's eating, that's converting and causing the rising and stuff. So it's consuming the flour, if that gives it a different,
Well, it's,
That's
it's,
very
it's
different.
consuming
Now we're back
sugars,
to
isn't it?
it's, yeah, within
Yeah,
the flour.
which is, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, we're really pressing this one.
But I'm just saying, if it gives it a different look or a twist.
What?
I mean, the Jewish people used yeast because in the Passover, they had to take off in a hurry because so they went with the unleavened bread because
Right.
the yeast hadn't.
Didn't have time to
Didn't have
ferment.
time.
Yeah.
So I would say they would use yeast, I mean,
If they could.
if they could.
Yeah, it has positive and negative connotations.
And again, I would take in your theological angle, you know, God doesn't, number 3, God's kingdom will spread on its own. Well, in regard to this, a woman put the yeast in, so it seems to be at odds.
Well, the woman is God then in that scenario.
I love it.
But she's still making bread, she's still cooking.
She's still in the
She's
kitchen.
still in the kitchen.
All right, sorry about that.
Right? And that, we don't always have to be in these parables.
We were just at a Sabbat Friday night,
Yeah.
and definitely, I mean, a Sabbat loaf is definitely a leavened loaf, so I agree with the Passover connection where there, if you said it, there wasn't time. They had to get out vamoose, and
Yeah.
although they could have made soda bread, there would have been time.
And the Greek is probably best as hidden instead of mixed.
Yeah.
You could make something out of that if you want. Right, there will be other parables about how the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field. So maybe it has a relation to the kingdom is small and hidden, but makes a big difference. Or we kind of have to have our eyes and ears open to find it and see it, that it's not just going to be like flashing lights, you know, that are obvious. Okay, no, it's almost 11 o'clock.
You can do the last one.
Yeah, we got time to do, let's see, the treasure and the pearl. It's our last one here. So toward the bottom of 5. This is really two separate parables that are kind of the same thing. So they're both from Matthew. So someone could just read under the point 4 here, the treasure. You could just
I
read
can
both.
read them.
Kathy, thank
The
you.
kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and reburied. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it.
Excellent. So initial thoughts on these ones. They're kind of twins.
Like you're giving it all up for one thing.
Giving it all up for one thing. Oh, where have I heard that in the Gospels before? Yeah, absolutely. Which is hard. Easy to say, hard to do.
Was it just luck he found it, or did God direct him there?
That's a good question.
And why in the world did he rebury it again? I mean, in somebody else's field.
Yeah, so we're getting into a morality question here. Should he have alerted the landowner that there was this awesome treasure buried in his field and he didn't let him know and he, bought the field?
Makes them think there's more.
What makes him think there's more? Well,
Just because there's one.
well, maybe that treasure itself was all he needed, right?
It's a big one.
Yeah.
Like in the second.
I don't like your point 3.
What? Of interpretive options?
Yeah.
The interpretive options don't come from me. Woof, I'm off the hook. This shows the cost of discipleship. The man sells all he has to obtain the treasure. Well, then I would tell you not to read some of the things that Jesus has to say. So when he comes across, right, the rich man, and the rich man says, I followed all 613 commandments. And Jesus doesn't, I love that, the meeting between the two of them, because Jesus doesn't say, well, that's not possible. He kind of goes along as if, okay, yep, you checked off all 613 laws of the Old Testament. And he says, but you're still lacking one thing. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and then you can follow me. Now you could argue, well, he's just talking to that one guy, seemingly. The disciples lament about how they've given up everything to follow Jesus, and Jesus says, well, you've given up everything now, but in the life to come, you're going to receive like everything, let's say like tenfold. I would agree. Point 3, I don't like it either, and I'm not sure. Sells all he has. I mean, certainly I haven't done that. I don't think many of us necessarily. Well, it's hard to say. What is the cost of discipleship?
How about we bargain? How about you give up a little bit and you get twofold, but you don't get tenfold?
How about if it's not material things, it's like giving up your ways of
Yeah.
what you.
Jesus
the
would
way
probably
you-
say
the way
that.
you used to live.
Yeah, I think that could be another way to do it. Jesus would probably just say that this tax collectors and the prostitutes will get into the kingdom of heaven before you, as if there's some strange pecking order. And I've got a question about how that functions
I
too.
don't care as long as I get in, I don't care if they're ahead of me, it's fine.
They're at the VIP tables, and you're just kind of at the.
I keep thinking about the one man that, and I don't, these people that die and come back. One of them was, he thought he was doing so much good in the world. One of the things I can remember is he was a foster parent and but he wasn't gonna make it into heaven. He got to come back to earth, luckily, because he wasn't gonna make it, because he was doing it so he could beat on his chest and say, I am a foster parent, and I did this, and I did that. His heart wasn't in the right place, so that kind of like.
Because he did it for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
There is that too, even,
Yeah.
we try to be good, sometimes we do it for our own.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's for sure. This parable, or these two parables, I guess, get paired, so they'll show up at the end of July too. So they get paired with the previous parable about the yeast. So although it didn't say hidden in the text, it gets paired with parables that clearly talk about this hidden thing. And man, I love when the lectionary just gives you like 4 different parables to have to preach on, when you could preach 30 different sermons out of any one of these parables, and then you just have to flat out ignore. Like, you can't preach on all of these, which is a bummer.
Because the first guy, even though he still buried it again. At least he didn't steal it, is what I'm trying to say. He could have just dug the treasure up and kept it for himself. At least he bought the land.
He buys the land, he does. He doesn't tell the landowner that it's hidden there.
Right. So he's good and bad, just like we all are.
Yeah. Another difference is that the first one seems like he just stumbles upon it. Like, a man just finds it. We don't really know how he finds it, but he seems to stumble across it. Versus the second one, it says that the merchant's in search of fine pearls. So he knows what he's looking for and he's searching for it. Whereas the first one is just, he's just walking along minding his own business and trips across this treasure.
Well, basically, he's trespassing on somebody else's field.
Naughty.
That is the point of the parable. There should be no.
In my notes here, it says in ancient times it was common to hide treasure in the ground since there was no banks. So So now when
Oh.
was he trespassing, he knew something probably was there and he stole it.
There we go. So if I were to preach,
Buddy
If
bought
I
it from the guy,
were
so
to
the
preach
guy
on
that he was
this-
selling it to didn't go and dig up the treasure.
Well, he must not have known it was there.
he didn't know it was there.
God, he buried it there.
So I would focus on either the joy, how does encountering Jesus change you? Right? So this guy trips over this treasure and it changes his life. Right? So how does encountering Jesus change us? That's a happy way to think about this parable. You could focus on the cost of discipleship, the not so happy side. What do you got to give up to be a disciple? Those are two different sermons right there. You could focus on the hiddenness of the kingdom, right? Especially if this text is paired with the yeast one, that the kingdom of heaven is hidden out there somewhere. So how do we go about encountering and finding where Jesus is showing up out in the world?
So if you take that interpretive option, number one, it says to substitute the words, it says the kingdom of heaven is like Jesus hidden in the world, which I find and rebury, and then in my joy, I go and sell all that I have and buy that field.
Yeah.
I don't know if it gives it a different twist, but it,
A little bit.
Yeah.
Thank heavens for the fog of metaphor.
I think you need to concentrate on some of the things around these parables instead of just the parable.
Excising them out.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm looking at your first one, Mark.
That has a lot of parables around
Well,
it.
things around here, for example, as soon as he was alone, his followers along with the 12 began asking him about the parables. And he was saying to them, "To you has been given the mystery of the kingdom of God, but those who are outside get everything in parables." Why is that? And then in order that while seeing they may see and not perceive, and while hearing they may hear and not understand, lest they return and be forgiven. I mean, so he's saying.
In
it's
Mark
right
chapter,
before-
in
it's
Mark chapter 4,
Mark 4.
verse 12.
He's basically saying, we don't really want them to understand this because lest they would turn and be forgiven.
Well,
And
he's
then you
qu-
go over to the other side over here, on number 25, there's, after the parable with the lamp, he says, "For whoever has, to him shall more be given, and whoever does not have, even what he has shall be taken away from him."
Yep.
So I mean, all these verses around these parables to me are much more interesting than the parables.
It can be. Well, there's a lot of parables in Mark chapter 4. Verse 25 will show up affixed to a parable we will get to. So
Okay.
we will talk about that happy
Okay.
verse. Jesus, in Mark chapter 4, verse 12, he's quoting, I think, from Isaiah, I want to say. Yeah, we could talk about that.
He's almost pointing out, we really don't want them to understand this because they might then become forgiven. So,
But if you read, so Mark's gospel as a whole, though, talks about, right, Jesus will heal people, and then he'll say, don't tell people.
Don't go tell anybody, yeah.
There's a hiddenness to Jesus' ministry in Mark's gospel in particular. Mark's gospel is fascinating, I think, because of that. So there is a hiddenness to Jesus' ministry in Mark's gospel. And that is a quote from the Old Testament
Okay.
there. So it's not like it's a new word that Jesus is saying. I agree. It's not easy, and I don't have a quick answer.
That's what I mean, the parables are interesting, but they're pretty straightforward, but the stuff around it to me is more confusing than ever, so.
Yeah, I would agree. Look at what happens before and after the parables. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes,
Makes it worse.
well, sometimes it's just irrelevant, right? Sometimes the parable is just told in isolation, but sometimes it can help. Any final thoughts on? This was the easiest week of the 4. How does that make you feel?
Uh-oh.
No, we're good? No one dares ask another
No.
question? Okay. Let's